Hello, darling kids. It's Sunday night. I'm cozy in my jammies, and I thought before bed we'd do the next 5 chapters. We're on chapter 11 of The Wizard of Oz. Everybody ready? Here we go. The wonderful Emerald City of Oz. Even with eyes protected by the green spectacles, Dorothy and her friends were at first dazzled by the brilliance of the wonderful city. The streets were lined with beautiful houses, all built of green marble and studded everywhere with sparkling emeralds. They walked over a pavement of the same green marble, and where the blocks were joined together were rows of emeralds, set closely and glittering in the brightness of the sun. An emerald is a bright green stone, and it's a birthstone for May. And it is important to us in our family because we named our company Emerald, because Daddy was born in May and my name is Green. So we love the Emerald City. We'd love to go see it. The window panes were of green glass. Even the sky above the city had a green tint, and the rays of the sun were green. There were many people, men, women, and children, walking about, and these were all dressed in green clothes and had greenish skin. They looked at Dorothy and her strangely assorted company with wondering eyes. And the children all ran away and hid behind their mothers when they saw the lion. No one spoke to them. Many shops stood in the street, and Dorothy saw that everything in them was green. Green candy and green popcorn were offered for sale, as well as green shoes, green hats, and green clothes of all sorts. At one place, a man was selling green lemonade, and when the children bought it, Dorothy could see that they paid for it with green pennies. There seemed to be no horses nor animals of any kind. The men carried things around in little green carts, which they pushed before them. Everyone seemed happy and contented and prosperous. The guardian of the gates led them through the streets until they came to a big building, exactly in the middle of the city, which was the Palace of Oz. The Great Wizard. There was a soldier before the door, dressed in a green uniform and wearing a long green beard. "Here are strangers," said the guardian of the gates to him, "and they demand to see the Great Oz." "Step inside," answered the soldier, "and I will carry your message to him." So they passed through the palace gates and were led into a big room with a green carpet and lovely green furniture set with emeralds. The soldier made them all wipe their feet upon the green mat before entering this room, and when they were seated, he said politely, "Please make yourselves comfortable while I go to the door of the throne room and tell Oz you are here." They had to wait a long time before the soldier returned. When at last he came back, Dorothy asked, "Have you seen Oz?" "Oh, no," returned the soldier. "I have never seen him, but I spoke to him as he sat behind his screen and gave him your message. He says he will grant you an audience, if you so desire, but each one of you must enter his presence alone, and he will admit but one each day. Therefore, as you must remain in the palace for several days, I will have you shown to rooms where you may rest in comfort after your journey." "Why, thank you," replied the girl. "That is very kind of Oz." The soldier now blew upon a green whistle, and at once a young girl dressed in a pretty green silk gown entered the room. She had lovely green hair and green eyes, and she bowed low before Dorothy as she said, "Follow me, and I will show you your room." So Dorothy said goodbye to all her friends except Toto, and taking the dog in her arms, followed the green girl through 7 passages up 3 flights of stairs until they came to a room at the front of the palace. It was the sweetest little room in the world, with a soft, comfortable bed that had sheets of green silk and a green velvet counterpane. The counterpane is a bedspread. There was a tiny fountain in the middle of the room that shot a spray of green perfume into the air to fall back into a beautifully carved green marble basin. Beautiful green flowers stood in the windows, and there was a shelf with a row of little green books. When Dorothy had time to open the books, she found them full of queer green pictures that made her laugh. They were so funny. In a wardrobe, there were many green dresses made of silk and satin and velvet, and all of them fitted Dorothy exactly. Here's a picture of the green city. Kind of hard to see. You ought to look at the one in your book. "Make yourself perfectly at home," said the green girl, "and if you wish for anything, ring the bell. Oz will send for you tomorrow morning." So she left Dorothy alone and went back to the others. These she also led to rooms, and each one of them found himself lodged in a very pleasant part of the palace. Of course, this politeness was wasted on the Scarecrow, for when he found himself alone in his room, he stood stupidly in one spot just within the doorway to wait until morning. It would not rest him to lie down, and he could not close his eyes, so he remained all night staring at a little spider that was weaving its web in the corner of the room, just as if it were not one of the most wonderful rooms in the world. The Tin Woodman lay down on his bed from force of habit, for he remembered when he was made of flesh, but not being able to sleep, he passed the night moving his joints up and down to make sure they kept in good working order. The Lion would have preferred a bed of dried leaves in the forest and did not like being shut up in a room, but he had too much sense to let this worry him, so he sprang upon the bed, rolled himself up like a cat, and purred himself to sleep in a minute. The next morning after breakfast, the Green Maiden came and fetched Dorothy, and she dressed her in one of the prettiest gowns, made of green brocaded satin. Dorothy put on a green silk apron and tied a green ribbon around Toto's neck, and they started for the throne room of the Great Oz. First, they came to a great hall in which many ladies and gentlemen of the court, all dressed in rich costumes. These people had nothing to do but talk to each other, but they always came to wait outside the throne room every morning, although they were never permitted to see Oz. As Dorothy entered, they looked at her curiously, and one of them whispered, "Are you really going to look upon the face of Oz the Terrible?" "Of course," answered the girl, "if he will see me." "Oh, he will see you," said the soldier who had taken her message to the wizard, "although he does not like to have people ask to see him. Indeed, at first he was angry and said I should send you back where you came from. Then he asked me what you looked like, and when I mentioned your silver shoes, he was very much interested. At last I told him about the mark on your forehead, and he decided he would admit you to his presence." Just then a bell rang, and the green girl said to Dorothy, "This is the signal. You must go into the throne room alone." Do you remember where she got the mark on her forehead? Do you remember that the good witch kissed her? She opened a little door, and Dorothy walked boldly through and found herself in a wonderful place. It was a big round room with a high arched roof, and the walls and ceiling and floor were covered with large emeralds set closely together. In the center of the ceiling was a great light, as bright as the sun, which made the emeralds sparkle in a wonderful manner. But what interested Dorothy most was the big throne of green marble that stood in the middle of the room. It was shaped like a chair and sparkled with gems and did everything else. And in the center of the chair was an enormous head, without a body to support it or any arms or legs whatsoever. There was no hair upon this head, but it had eyes and a nose and a mouth, and it was bigger than the head of the biggest giant. As Dorothy gazed upon this in wonder and fear, the eyes turned slowly and looked at her sharply. And she heard a voice say, "I am Oz, the great and terrible. Who are you, and why do you seek me?" It was not such an awful voice as she had expected to come from the big head. So she took courage and answered, "I'm Dorothy, the small and meek. I have come to you for help." The eyes looked at her thoughtfully for a full minute. Then said the voice, "Where did you get the silver shoes?" "Oh, I got them from the Wicked Witch of the East when my house fell on her and killed her," she replied. "Where did you get the mark upon your forehead?" continued the voice. "Oh, well, that's where the Good Witch of the North kissed me when she bade me goodbye and sent me to you," said the girl. Again the eyes looked at her sharply, and they saw she was telling the truth. Then Oz asked, "What do you wish me to do?" "Send me back to Kansas, where my Aunt Em and Uncle Henry are," she answered earnestly. "I don't like your country, although it is very beautiful. I am sure Aunt Em will be dreadfully worried over my being away so long." The eyes winked 3 times. And then they turned up to the ceiling and down to the floor and rolled around in the head, so they seemed to see every part of the room. And at last they looked at Dorothy again. "Why should I do this for you?" asked Oz. "Because you are strong, and I am weak. Because you are a great wizard, and I am only a helpless little girl," she answered. "But you were strong enough to kill the Wicked Witch of the East," said Oz. "Oh, that just happened," returned Dorothy simply. "I could not help it.
"Well," said the head, "I will give you my answer. You have no right to expect me to send you back to Kansas unless you do something for me in return. In this country, everyone must pay for everything he gets. If you wish me to use my magic power to send you home again, you must do something for me first. Help me, and I will help you."
"What must I do?" asked the girl.
"Kill the Wicked Witch of the West," answered Oz.
"But I cannot!" exclaimed Dorothy, greatly surprised.
"You killed the Witch of the East, and you wear the silver shoes, which bear a powerful charm. There is now but one Wicked Witch left in all this land, and you can tell me that she is dead. And when you can tell me that she is dead, I will send you back to Kansas, but not before."
The little girl began to weep. She was so disappointed. The eyes winked again and looked at her anxiously, as if the great Oz felt that she could help him if she would. I never killed anything willingly," she sobbed. "And even if I wanted to, how could I kill a wicked witch? If you, who are great and terrible, cannot kill her yourself, how do you expect me to do it?"
"I do not know," said the head. "But that is my answer, and until the Wicked Witch dies, you will not see your uncle and aunt again. Remember that the witch is wicked, tremendously wicked, and ought to be killed. Now go, and do not ask to see me again until you have done your task."
Sorrowfully, Dorothy left the throne room and went back to where the Lion and the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman were waiting to hear what Oz had said to her. "There is no hope for me," she said sadly, "for Oz will not send me home until I have killed the Wicked Witch of the West. And that I can never do." Her friends were sorry, but could do nothing to help her. So she went to her own room and lay down on the bed and cried herself to sleep. Well, the next morning the soldier with the green whiskers came to the Scarecrow and said, "Come with me, for Oz has sent for you." So the Scarecrow followed him and was admitted into the great throne room, where he saw, sitting on the emerald throne, a most lovely lady. She was dressed in green silk gauze and wore upon her flowing green locks a crown of jewels. Growing from her shoulders were wings, gorgeous in color, and so light that they fluttered at the slightest breath of air reached them. When the Scarecrow had bowed, as prettily as his straw stuffing would let him, before this beautiful creature, she looked upon him sweetly and said, "I am Oz, the great and terrible. Who are you, and why do you seek me?" Now the Scarecrow, who had expected to see the great head that Dorothy had told him about, was much astonished, but he answered her bravely, "Well, I'm only a scarecrow stuffed with straw. Therefore, I have no brains, and I come to you praying that you will put brains in my head instead of straw, so that I may become as much a man as any of the others in your dominions." "Why should I do this for you?" asked the lady. And here she is in my book. This is what she looks like. And there's the poor Scarecrow, scared on the ground. "Because you're wise and powerful, no one else can help me," answered the Scarecrow. "I never grant favors without some return," said Oz. "But this much I will promise. If you will kill for me the Wicked Witch of the West, I will bestow upon you a great many brains, and such good brains that you will be the wisest man in the land of Oz." "I thought you asked Dorothy to kill the witch," said the Scarecrow in surprise. "So I did. I don't care who kills her. But until she's dead, I will not grant your wish. Now go, and do not seek me again until you have earned the brains that you so greatly desire." The Scarecrow went sorrowfully back to his friends and told them what Oz had said, and Dorothy was surprised to find that the great wizard was not a head, as she had seen him, but a lovely lady. "All the same," said the Scarecrow, "she needs a heart as much as the Tin Woodman." On the next morning, the soldier with the green whiskers came to the Tin Woodman and said, "Oz has sent for you. Follow me." Well, so the Tin Woodman followed him and came to the great throne room. He did not know whether he would find Oz a lovely lady or a head, but he hoped it would be the lovely lady, for, he said to himself, "If it is the head, I'm sure I shall not be given a heart, since a head has no heart of its own, and therefore cannot feel for me. But if it is the lovely lady, then perhaps I shall beg for a heart, for all ladies are themselves said to be kindly-hearted. But when the woodman entered the great throne room, he saw neither the head nor the lady, for Oz had taken the shape of a most terrible beast. It was nearly as big as an elephant, and the green throne seemed hardly strong enough to hold it. The beast had a head like that of a rhinoceros, only there were 5 eyes in its face, and 5 long arms growing out of its body, and it also had 5 long, slim legs. Thick, woolly hair covered every part of it, and a more dreadful-looking monster could not be imagined. It was fortunate that the Tin Woodman had no heart at that moment, for it would have beat loud from terror. But being only tin, the Woodman was not at all afraid, although he was much disappointed. "I am Oz, the great and terrible," spoke the beast, in a voice that was one great roar. "Who are you, and why do you seek me?" "Well, I am a woodman, and made of tin. Therefore I have no heart, and cannot love. I pray you to give me a heart, that I may be as other men are." "Why should I do this?" demanded the beast. "Well, because I ask it, and you alone can grant my request," answered the woodman. Oz gave a low growl at this, and said gruffly, "If you indeed desire a heart, you must earn it." "How?" said the woodman. "Help Dorothy kill the Wicked Witch of the West," replied the beast. "When the witch is dead, come to me, and I will then give you the biggest and kindest and most loving heart in the land of Oz." So the Tin Woodman was forced to return sorrowfully to his friends and tell them of the terrible beast he had seen. They all wondered greatly at the many forms the great wizard could take upon himself, and the lion said, "Well, if he's a beast, when I go to see him, I shall roar my loudest, and so frighten him that he will grant all I ask. And if he is the lovely lady, I shall pretend to spring upon her, and so compel her to do my bidding. And if he is the great head, he will be at my mercy, for I will roll that head around the room." Oh my gosh, there's a picture of all of them. And the lion saying how brave he's going to be. "Until he promises to give me what we desire. So be of good cheer, my friends, for yet all will be well." So the next morning, the soldier with the green whiskers led the lion to the great throne room and bade him enter the presence of Oz. The lion at once passed through the door and, glancing around, saw, to his surprise, that before the throne was a ball of fire, so fierce and glowing he could scarcely bear to gaze upon it. His first thought was that Oz had by accident caught fire and was burning up. But when he tried to go nearer, the heat was so intense it singed his whiskers, and he crept back tremblingly to a spot near the door. Then a low, quiet voice came from the ball of fire, and these were the words it spoke. "I am Oz, the great and terrible. Who are you, and why do you seek me?" And the lion answered, "I'm a cowardly lion, afraid of everything. I come to you to beg that you give me courage, so that in reality I may become the king of beasts, as all men call me." "Why should I give you courage?" demanded Oz. "Because of all wizards, you are the greatest and alone to have power to grant my request," answered the lion. The ball of fire burned fiercely for a time, and the voice said, "Bring me proof that the Wicked Witch is dead, and that moment I will give you courage. But so long as the witch lives, you must remain a coward." The lion got angry at this speech, but could say nothing in reply, and while he stood silently gazing at the ball of fire, it became so furiously hot that he turned tail and rushed from the room. He was glad to find his friends waiting for him, and told him of his terrible interview with the wizard. "Well, what shall we do now?" said Dorothy sadly. "There is only one thing we can do," returned the lion, "and that's to go to the land of the Winkies and seek out the Wicked Witch and destroy her." "But suppose we cannot," said the girl. "Then I shall never have courage," declared the lion. "And I shall never have brains," added the Scarecrow. "And I shall never have a heart," spoke the Tin Woodman. "And I shall never see Aunt Em and Uncle Henry," said Dorothy, beginning to cry. "Be careful," cried the green girl. "The tears will fall on your green silk gown and spot it." So Dorothy dried her eyes and said, "Well, I suppose we must try it, but I am sure I do not want to kill anybody, even to see Aunt Em again." "I will go with you, but I'm too much of a coward to kill the witch," said the lion. "I'll go too," declared the Scarecrow, "but I shall not be of much help to you. I'm such a fool."
I haven't the heart to harm even a witch, remarked the Tin Woodman, but if you go, I shall certainly go with you. Therefore it was decided to start upon their journey the very next morning, and the woodman sharpened his axe on a green grindstone and had all his joints properly oiled. The Scarecrow stuffed himself with fresh new straw, and Dorothy put new paint on his eyes so that he could see better. The green girl, who was very kind to them, filled Dorothy's basket with good things to eat and fastened a little bell around Toto's neck with a green ribbon. Well, they went to bed quite early and slept soundly until daylight, when they were awakened by the crowing of a green cock that lived in the backyard of the palace and the cackling of a hen that had just laid a green egg. Well, now that we've finished chapter 11, let me ask you just a couple of questions about it to see if you remember what happened. Can you draw a picture of what Oz looked like when he talked to Dorothy? What did he look like? Talk to each other and see if you can remember. And then, when the Scarecrow went in to see Oz, what did he or she look like? Can you draw a picture of what she looked like? That's a hint. It's a she. Then, when the Tin Man went in to talk, what did Oz look like? And then, can you draw a picture of that? And then, when, who am I missing? The Cowardly Lion went to talk. What did Oz look like then? And see if you can draw a picture of all the ways Oz showed him or herself to all of the people. And I wonder why Oz looks different to each person when they go in. What are they really looking at? I guess we'll maybe find out soon. Well, now they're leaving the Emerald City. And this next chapter, chapter 12, is called The Search for the Wicked Witch. Oh, by the way, I thought a fun activity for chapter 11, if you need something fun to do, would be to go in your closets and see if you can put on everything green. If you can find enough green clothes to wear everything green today. And then when you do, you can have a little march around your neighborhood or march around your house and have a green parade. And let's see maybe even if you can use some green food coloring and eat some green food today. Remember the book Green Eggs and Ham? You can have some fun with some green today. See if your mommy knows how to make green popcorn. The Search for the Wicked Witch. Chapter 12. The soldier with the green whiskers led them through the streets of the Emerald City until they reached the room where the guardian of the gates lived. This officer unlocked their spectacles to put them back in the great box, and then he politely opened the gate for our friends. Let me just ask you that when they put on the spectacles, everything they saw in the whole city was green. So think about that. Do you really think everything in the city was green? Or was it because they were looking through the glasses? I wonder. Which roads lead to the Wicked Witch of the West? Asked Dorothy. There's no road, answered the guardian of the gates. No one ever wishes to go that way. Well, then how are we to find her? Said Dorothy. Well, that will be easy, replied the man. For when she knows you are in the country of the Winkies, she will find you and make you all her slaves. Perhaps not, said the Scarecrow, for we mean to destroy her. Oh, well, then that's different. No one's ever destroyed her before, so I naturally thought she would make slaves of you, for she has done so for all the rest. But take care, for she is wicked and fierce and may not allow you to destroy her. Keep to the west where the sun sets, and you cannot fail to find her. So they thanked him and bade him goodbye and turned toward the west, walking over fields of soft grass dotted here and there with daisies and buttercups. Dorothy still wore the pretty silk dress she had put on in the palace, but now, to her surprise, she found that the dress was no longer green, but pure white. And the ribbon around Toto's neck had also lost its green color and was as white as Dorothy's dress. Why do you think they're a different color now? The Emerald City was soon left far behind, and as they advanced, the ground became rougher and hillier, for there were no farms or houses in this country of the West, and the ground was untilled. In the afternoon, the sun shone hot in their faces, and there were no trees to offer them shade, so that before night Dorothy and Toto and the lion were tired, and they lay down upon the grass and fell asleep, with the woodman and the Scarecrow keeping watch. Now the Wicked Witch of the West had but one eye, yet that was as powerful as a telescope, and could see everywhere. So as she sat at the door of her castle,
She happened to look around and saw Dorothy lying asleep, with her friends all about her. They were a long distance off, but the wicked witch was angry to find them in her country. So she blew upon a silver whistle that hung around her neck. Tweet! At once there came running to her from all directions a pack of great wolves. They had long legs and fierce eyes and sharp teeth. "Go to these people," said the witch, "and tear them to pieces."
"Are you not going to make them your slaves?" asked the leader of the wolf.
"No. One is of tin and one is of straw, one is a girl, another a lion. None of them is fit to work, so you may tear them all into small pieces."
"Very well," said the wolf, and he dashed away at full speed, followed by the others. It was lucky the Scarecrow and the Woodman were wide awake and heard the wolves coming.
"This is my fight," said the Woodman, "so get behind me and I will meet them as they come." He seized his axe, which he had made very sharp, and as the leader of the wolves came on, the Tin Woodman swung his arm and chopped the wolf's head right off its body, so that it immediately died. As soon as he could raise his axe, another wolf came up, and he fell under the sharp edge of the Tin Man's weapon. There were 40 wolves, and 40 times a wolf was killed, so at last they all lay dead in a heap before the Woodman. Then he put down his axe and sat beside the Scarecrow and said, who said, "That was a good fight, friend." They waited until Dorothy awoke in the morning. The little girl was quite frightened when she saw the great pile of shaggy wolves, but the Tin Woodman told her all. She thanked him for saving them and sat down to breakfast, after which they started again upon their journey. Now this same morning the Wicked Witch came to the door of her castle and looked out with her one eye that could see afar off. She saw all her wolves lying dead, and the strangers still traveling through the country. This made her angrier than before, and she blew her silver whistle twice. Tweet, tweet! Straightway a great flock of wild crows came flying toward her, enough to darken the sky, and the Wicked Witch said to the King Crow, "Fly at once to the strangers and pick out their eyes and tear them to pieces." The wild crows flew in one great flock toward Dorothy and her companions. And when the little girl saw them coming, she was afraid, but the Scarecrow said, "Now this is my battle, so you lie down beside me and you will not be harmed." So they all lay down upon the ground except the Scarecrow, and he stood up and stretched out his arms. And when the crows saw him, they were frightened, as these birds always are by scarecrows, and they did not even dare to come any nearer. But the King Crow said, "It is only a stuffed man. I will pick his eyes out." The King Crow flew at the Scarecrow, who caught it by the head and twisted its neck until it died. And then another crow flew at him, and another, and the Scarecrow twisted their necks also. There were 40 crows, and 40 times the Scarecrow twisted a neck, until last all were lying dead beside him. And then he called to his companions to rise, and again they went upon their journey. When the Wicked Witch looked out again and saw all the crows lying in a heap, she got into a terrible rage and blew 3 times upon her silver whistle. Tweet, tweet, tweet! Forthwith there was heard a great buzzing in the air, and a swarm of black bees came flying toward her. "Go to the strangers and sting them to death," said the witch. And the bees turned and flew rapidly until they came to where Dorothy and her friends were walking. But the Woodman had seen them coming, and the Scarecrow had decided what to do. "Take out my straw and scatter it over the little girl and the dog and the lion," said the Scarecrow, "and the bees cannot sting them." This the Woodman did, and as Dorothy lay close beside the lion and held Toto in her arms, the straw covered them entirely. The bees came and found no one but the Woodman to sting, so they flew at him and broke off all their stingers against the tin, without hurting the Woodman at all. And as bees cannot live when their stingers are broken, that was the end of the black bees, and they lay scattered thick about the Woodman like little heaps of fine coal. Then Dorothy and the lion got up, and the girl helped the Tin Woodman put all the straw back into the Scarecrow again, until he was as good as ever. So they started upon their journey once more. The Wicked Witch was so angry when she saw her black bees in little heaps like fine coal that she stamped her foot and tore her hair and gnashed her teeth. And then she called a dozen of her slaves, who were the Winkies, and she gave them sharp spears, telling them to go to the strangers and destroy them. Now, the Winkies were not a brave people, but they had to do as they were told, so they marched away until they came near to Dorothy. Then the lion gave a great roar and sprang toward them, and the poor Winkies were so frightened that they ran back as fast as they could. When they returned to the castle, the Wicked Witch beat them well with a strap and sent them back to their work, after which she sat down to think about what she should do next. She could not understand how all her plans to destroy these strangers had failed. But she was a powerful witch, as well as a wicked one, and she soon made up her mind how to act. There was in her cupboard a golden cap. This golden cap had a charm. Whoever owned it could call 3 times upon the winged monkeys, who would obey any order they were given. But no person could command these strange creatures more than 3 times. Twice already the Wicked Witch had used the charm of the cap. Once was when she had made the Winkies her slaves and set herself to rule over their country, and the winged monkeys had helped her do this. The second time was when she had fought against the great Oz himself and driven him out of the land of the West. The winged monkeys had helped her do this. Only once more could she use the golden cap. For this reason, she did not like to do so till her other powers were exhausted. And here we see her with her golden cap. And those are the winged monkeys. They have wings. A monkey with wings, that kind of scares me. But now that her fierce wolves and her wild crows and her stinging bees were gone, her slaves had been scared away by the cowardly lion, she saw there was only one way left to destroy Dorothy and her friends. So the Wicked Witch took the golden cap out from the cupboard and placed it upon her head. And she stood upon her left foot and said slowly, "Eppy, peppy, cacky." Next, she stood upon her right foot and said, "Hilo, holo, hello." And after this, she stood upon both feet and cried in a loud voice, "Zizzy, zoozy, zick." Now the charm began to work. The sky was darkened and a low rumbling sound was heard in the air. There was a rushing of many wings, a great chattering and laughing, and the sun came out of the dark sky to show the Wicked Witch surrounded by a crowd of monkeys, each with a pair of immense and powerful wings on his shoulders. One, much bigger than the others, seemed to be their leader. He flew close to the witch and said, "You have called us for the 3rd and last time. What do you command?" "Go to the strangers who are within my land and destroy them all, except the lion," said the Wicked Witch. "Bring that beast to me, for I have a mind to harness him like a horse and make him work." "Your command shall be obeyed," said the leader, and then with a great deal of chattering and noise, the winged monkeys flew away to the place where Dorothy and her friends were walking. Some of the monkeys seized the Tin Woodman and carried him through the air until they were over a country thickly covered with sharp rocks. Here they dropped the poor woodman, who fell a great distance onto the rocks, where he lay so battered and dented that he could neither move nor even groan. Others of the monkeys caught the Scarecrow, and with their long fingers they pulled all of the straw out of his clothes and head. They made his hat and boots and clothes into a small bundle and threw it into the top branches of a tall tree. The remaining monkeys threw pieces of stout rope around the lion and wound so many coils around his body and head and legs until he was unable to bite or scratch or struggle in any way. They lifted him up and flew away with him to the witch's castle, where he was placed in a small yard with a high iron fence around it so that he could not escape. But Dorothy they did not harm at all. She stood with Toto in her arms, watching the sad fate of her comrades and thinking it would soon be her turn. The leader of the winged monkeys flew up to her, and his long, hairy arms stretched out and his ugly face grinning terribly. But he saw the mark of the good witch's kiss on her forehead and stopped short and motioned to the others not to touch her. "We dare not harm this little girl," he said to them, "for she is protected by the power of good, and that is greater than the power of evil. All we can do is carry her to the castle of the Wicked Witch and leave her there." So carefully and gently, they lifted Dorothy in their arms and carried her swiftly through the air until they came to the castle, where they set her down upon the front doorstep. And then the leader said to the witch,
Show them all what they're doing.
We have obeyed you as far as we were able. The Tin Woodman and the Scarecrow are destroyed, and the lion is tied up in your yard. But the little girl we dare not harm, nor the dog she carries in her arms. Your power over our band is now ended, and you will never see us again. And then all the winged monkeys, with much laughing and chattering and noise, flew into the air and were soon out of sight. The Wicked Witch was both surprised and worried when she saw the mark on Dorothy's forehead, for she knew well that neither the winged monkeys nor she herself dare hurt that girl in any way. She looked down at Dorothy's feet, and seeing the silver shoes, began to tremble with fear, for she knew what a powerful charm belonged to them. At first the witch was tempted to run away from Dorothy, but she happened to look into the child's eyes and saw how simple the soul in them was, and that the little girl did not know of the wonderful power the silver shoes gave her. So the Wicked Witch laughed to herself and thought, I can still make her my slave, for she does not know how to use her power. Then she said to Dorothy, harshly and severely, Come with me, and see that you mind everything I tell you, for if you do not, I will make an end of you, as I did of the Tin Woodman and the Scarecrow. Dorothy followed her through many of the beautiful rooms in her castle until they came to the kitchen, where the witch bade her clean the pots and kettles and sweep the floor and keep the fire fed with wood. So Dorothy went to work meekly, with her mind made up to work as hard as she could, for she was glad the Wicked Witch had decided not to kill her. With Dorothy hard at work, the witch thought she would like to go into the courtyard and harness the cowardly lion like a horse, and it would amuse her, she was sure, to make him draw her chariot whenever she wished to go out for a drive. But as she opened the gate, the lion gave a loud roar and bounded at her so fiercely that the witch was afraid and ran out and shut the gate again. If I cannot harness you, said the witch to the lion, speaking through the bars of the gate, I can starve you. You shall have nothing to eat until you do as I wish. So after that she took no food to the imprisoned lion. But every day she came to the gate at noon and asked, Are you ready to be harnessed like a horse? And the lion would answer, No. If you come in this yard, I will bite you. The reason the lion did not have to do as the witch wished was that every night, while the woman was asleep, Dorothy carried him some food from the cupboard. After he had eaten, he would lie down on his bed of straw, and Dorothy would lie beside him and put her head on his soft, shaggy mane, while they talked of their troubles and tried to plan some way to escape. But they could find no way to get out of the castle, for it was constantly guarded by the yellow Winkies, who were the slaves of the Wicked Witch and too afraid of her not to do as she told them. The girl had to work hard during the day, and often the witch threatened to beat her with the same old umbrella that she always carried in her hand. But in truth, she did not dare to strike Dorothy because of the mark upon her forehead. The child did not know this and was full of fear for herself and Toto. Once the witch struck Toto a blow with her umbrella, and the brave little dog flew at her and bit her leg in return. The witch did not bleed where she was bitten, for she was so wicked that the blood in her had dried up many years before. Dorothy's life became very sad as she grew to understand that it would be harder than ever to get back to Kansas and Auntie Em again. Sometimes she would cry bitterly for hours, with Toto sitting at her feet and looking into her face, whining dismally to show how sorry he was for his little mistress. Toto did not really care whether he was in Kansas or the land of Oz, so long as Dorothy was with him. But he knew the little girl was unhappy, and that made him unhappy too. Now the Wicked Witch had a great longing to have for her own the silver shoes which the girl always wore. Her bees and her crows and her wools were lying in heaps and drying up, and she had used up all the power of the golden cap. But if she could only get hold of those silver shoes, they would give her more power than all the other things she had lost. She watched Dorothy carefully to see if she ever took off the shoes, thinking she might steal them. But the child was so proud of her pretty shoes that she never took them off, except at night and when she took her bath. The witch was too much afraid of the dark to go into Dorothy's room at night to take the shoes, and her dread of water was greater than her fear of the dark. So she never came near when Dorothy was bathing. Indeed, the old witch never touched water, nor ever let water touch her in any way. But the wicked creature was very cunning, and she finally thought of a trick that would give her what she wanted. She placed a bar of iron in the middle of the kitchen floor, and then by her magic arts she made the iron invisible to human eyes, so that when Dorothy walked across the floor, she stumbled over the bar, not being able to see it, and fell at full length. She was not much hurt, but in her fall, one of the silver shoes came off, and before she could reach it, the witch snatched it and put it on her own skinny foot. The wicked woman was greatly pleased with the success of her trick, for as long as she had one of the shoes, she owned half the power of the charm, and Dorothy could not use it against her even if she had known how to do so. The little girl, seeing that she had lost one of her pretty shoes, grew angry and said to the witch, "Give me back my shoe." "Well, not," retorted the witch, "for now it's my shoe and not yours." "You are a wicked creature," cried Dorothy. "You have no right to take my shoe from me." "Well, I shall keep it just the same," said the witch, laughing at her. "And someday I shall get the other one from you, too." This made Dorothy so very angry that she picked up the bucket of water that stood near and dashed it over the witch, wetting her from head to foot. Instantly, the wicked woman gave a loud cry of fear, and then as Dorothy looked at her in wonder, the witch began to shrink and fall away. "See what you have done!" she screamed. "In a minute I shall melt away." "Oh dear, I'm very sorry indeed," said Dorothy, who was truly frightened to see the witch actually melting, like brown sugar, before her very eyes. "Didn't you know water would be the end of me?" asked the witch in a wailing, despairing voice. "Well, of course not," answered Dorothy. "How should I know that?" "Well, in a few minutes I shall be all melted, and you will have the castle to yourself. I have been wicked in my day, but I never thought a little girl like you would ever be able to melt me and end my wicked deeds. Look out, here I go!" With these words, the witch fell down in a brown, melted, shapeless mass and began to spread over the clean boards of the kitchen floor. Seeing that she really had melted away to nothing, Dorothy drew another bucket of water and threw it over the mess. Then she swept it all out the door. After picking out the silver shoe, which was all that was left of the old woman, she cleaned and dried it with a cloth and put it on her foot again. Then, being at last free to do as she chose, she ran out to the courtyard to tell the lion that the Wicked Witch of the West had come to an end and that they were no longer prisoners in a strange land. And there's the Wicked Witch melting. So that was chapter 12. And in chapter 12, we learned a little bit how wicked the witch was. What is the powerful thing that Dorothy has that she doesn't know how to use? And can you draw a picture of her very powerful charm that she wears on her feet? Chapter 13, How the Four Were Reunited. The Cowardly Lion was much pleased to hear that the Wicked Witch had been melted by a bucket of water, and Dorothy once again unlocked the gate of his prison and set him free. They went in together to the castle, where Dorothy's first act was to call all the Winkies together and tell them they were no longer slaves. There was great rejoicing among the yellow Winkies, for they had been made to work hard during many years for the Wicked Witch, who had always treated them with great cruelty. They kept this day as a holiday then and ever after, and spent the time in feasting and dancing. "If our friends the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman were only with us," said the Lion, "I should be quite happy." "Well, don't you suppose we could rescue them?" asked the girl anxiously. "We could try," said the Lion. So they called the yellow Winkies and asked them if they would help them rescue their friends, and the Winkies said they would be delighted to do all in their power for Dorothy, who had set them free from bondage. So she chose a number of the Winkies who looked as if they knew the most, and they all started away. They traveled that day and part of the next day until they came to the rocky plain where the Tin Woodman lay, all battered and bent. His axe was near him, but the blade was rusted and the handle was broken off. The Winkies lifted him tenderly in their arms and carried him back to the yellow castle again, Dorothy shedding a few tears by the way at the sad plight of her old friend, and the Lion looking sober and sorry. When they reached the castle, Dorothy said to the Winkies, "Are any of your people tinsmiths?" "Oh, yes, some of us are very good tinsmiths, and a tinsmith is a person who works on things made of tin, which is a metal." And of course the Tin Woodsman was made of tin. "Well, then bring them to me," she said, and when the tinsmiths came in, bringing with them their tools in baskets, she inquired, "Can you straighten out these dents in the Tin Woodman and bend them back into shape again and solder them together where he is broken?" The tinsmiths looked at the woodman very carefully and then answered that they thought they could mend him so he would be as good as ever. So they set to work in one of the big yellow rooms of the castle and worked for 3 days and 4 nights, hammering and twisting and bending and soldering and polishing and pounding at the legs and the body and the head of the Tin Woodman until at last he was straightened out in his old form. His joints worked as well as ever. To be sure, there were several patches on him, but the tinsmiths did a good job, and as the woodman was not a vain man, he did not mind the patches at all. When at last he walked into Dorothy's room and thanked her for rescuing him, he was so pleased that he wept tears of joy, and Dorothy had to wipe every tear carefully from his face with her apron so his joints would not be rusted. At the same time, her own tears fell thick and fast at the joy of meeting her old friend again, and these tears did not need to be wiped away. And as for the lion, he wiped his eyes so often with the tip of his tail that it became quite wet, and he was obliged to go out into the courtyard and hold it in the sun until it dried. "If only we had the Scarecrow with us again," said the Tin Woodman, when Dorothy had finished telling him everything that had happened. "I should be quite happy." "We must try to find him," said the girl. So she called the Winkies to help her, and they walked all day and part of the next until they came to the tall tree, in the branches of which the winged monkeys had tossed the Scarecrow's clothes. It was a very tall tree, and here they are, looking up into the tall tree, where the Scarecrow's clothes have been hidden. Oh, he's a mess. No one could climb it, but the woodman said at once, "I'll chop it down, and then we can get the Scarecrow's clothes." Now, while the tinsmiths had been working mending the woodman himself, another of the Winkies, who was a goldsmith, had made an axe handle of solid gold and fitted it to the woodman's axe instead of the old broken handle. Others polished the blade until all the rust was removed and it glistened like burnished silver. As soon as he had spoken, the Tin Woodman began to chop, 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 and in a short time the tree fell over with a crash when the Scarecrow's clothes fell out of the branches and rolled up onto the ground. Dorothy picked them up and had the Winkies carry them back to the castle, where they were stuffed with nice, clean straw, and behold, here was the Scarecrow, as good as ever, thanking them over and over again for saving him. Well, now that they were reunited, Dorothy and her friends spent a few happy days at the Yellow Castle, where they found everything they needed to make them comfortable. But one day the girl thought of Auntie Em and said, "We must go back to Oz and claim his promise." "Yes," said the woodman, "at last I shall get my heart." "And I shall get my brains," said the Scarecrow joyfully.
"And I shall get my courage," said the lion thoughtfully.
"And I shall get back to Kansas," said the girl, clapping her hands. "Oh, let us start for the Emerald City tomorrow." This they decided to do. The next day they called the Winkies together and bade them goodbye. The Winkies were sorry to have them go, and they had grown so fond of the Tin Woodman that they begged him to stay and rule over them in the Yellow Land of the West. Finding that they were determined to go, the Winkies gave Toto and the lion each a golden collar, and to Dorothy they presented a beautiful bracelet studded with diamonds, and to the Scarecrow they gave a gold-headed walking stick to keep him from stumbling, and to the Tin Woodman they offered a silver oil can inlaid with gold and set with precious jewels. Every one of the travelers made the Winkies a pretty speech in return, and all shook hands with them until their arms ached. Dorothy went to the witch's cupboard to fill her basket with good food for the journey, and there she saw the golden cap. She tried it on her own head and found that it fitted her exactly. She did not know anything about the charm of the golden cap, but she saw that it was pretty, so she made up her mind to wear it and carry her sunbonnet in her basket. Then, being prepared for the journey, they all started for the Emerald City, and the Winkies gave them 3 cheers and as many good wishes to carry with them. And there they go, off down the no more Yellow Brick Road, huh? They're just going off to the city, all back together again. She's got her golden cap and her white dress on, and everybody looks great. Well, in that chapter, they went back and saved the Tin Woodman and the Scarecrow. Can you remember where they found the Tin Woodman? And I remember where they found the Scarecrow in the top of a tall, tall tree. And maybe you might want to do a picture of the Tin Woodman chopping down the tree. Or we could do a picture of them fixing the Tin Woodman with all his little breaks. Whatever you feel like doing. The Winged Monkeys, Chapter 14. You will remember that there was no road, not even a pathway, between the castle of the Wicked Witch and the Emerald City. When the 4 travelers went in search of the witch, she had seen them coming and sent the winged monkeys to bring them to her. It was much harder to find their way back through the big fields of buttercups and yellow daisies than it was being carried. They knew, of course, that they must go straight east toward the rising sun, and they started off in the right way. But at noon, when the sun was over their heads, they did not know which was east and which was west, and that was the reason they were lost in the great fields. They kept on walking, however, and at night the moon came out and shone brightly. So they lay down among the sweet-smelling yellow flowers and slept soundly until morning, all but the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman. So the next morning the sun was behind a cloud, but they started on as if they were quite sure which way to go. "If we walk far enough," said Dorothy, "we shall sometime come to some place, I am sure." But day by day passed away, and they still saw nothing before them but yellow fields. The Scarecrow began to grumble a bit. "We've surely lost our way," he said, "and unless we find it in time to reach the Emerald City, I will never get my brains." "Nor I my heart," declared the Tin Woodman. "It seems to me I can scarcely wait until I get to Oz, and you must admit this is a very long journey." "You'll see," said the Cowardly Lion with a whimper. "I haven't the courage to keep traveling forever without getting anywhere at all." Then Dorothy lost heart. She sat down on the grass and looked at her companions, and they all sat down and looked at her. And Toto found that for the first time in his life he was too tired to chase a butterfly that flew past his head. So he put out his tongue and panted and looked at Dorothy as if to ask what they should do next. "Suppose we call the field mice," she suggested. "They could probably tell us the way to the Emerald City." "Why, to be sure they could," cried the Scarecrow. "Why didn't we think of that before?" So Dorothy blew the little whistle she had always carried about her neck since the Queen of the Mice had given it to her. In a few minutes they heard the pattering of tiny feet, and many of the small gray mice came running up to her. Among them was the Queen herself, who asked in her squeaky little voice, "What can I do for my friends?" "We have lost our way," said Dorothy. "Can you tell us where the Emerald City is?" "Certainly," answered the Queen, "but it is a great way off, for you have had it at your backs all this time." Then she noticed Dorothy's golden cap and said, "Why don't you use the charm of the cap? Call the winged monkeys to you. They will carry you to the city of Oz in less than an hour." "I didn't know there was a charm," said Dorothy in surprise. "What is it?" "It's written inside the golden cap," replied the Queen of the Mice. "But if you're going to call the winged monkeys, we must run away, for they are full of mischief and think it's great fun to plague us." "Won't they hurt me?" asked the girl anxiously. "Oh, no, they must obey the wearer of the cap. Goodbye." And she scampered out of sight with all the mice hurrying after her. Dorothy looked inside the golden cap and saw some words written upon the lining. These, she thought, must be the charm, so she read the directions carefully and put the cap upon her head. "Epi, pepe, keki," she said, standing on her left foot. "What did you say?" said the Scarecrow, who did not know what she was doing. "Hello, hullo, hello," Dorothy went on, standing this time on her right foot. "Hello," said the Tin Woodman calmly. "Zizzy, zuzzy, zick," said Dorothy, who was now standing on both feet. This ended the saying of the charm, and they heard a great chattering and flapping of wings, and the band of winged monkeys flew up to them. The king bowed low before Dorothy and asked, "What is your command?" "We wish to go to the Emerald City," said the child, "and we have lost our way." "We will carry you," replied the king, and no sooner had he spoken than 2 of the monkeys caught Dorothy in their arms and flew away with her. Others took the Scarecrow and the Woodman and the Lion, and one little monkey seized Toto and flew after them, although the dog tried hard to bite him. The Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman were rather frightened at first, for they remembered how badly the winged monkeys had treated them before, but they saw that no harm was intended, so they rode through the air quite cheerfully and had a fine time looking at the pretty gardens and woods far below them. Dorothy found herself riding easily between 2 of the biggest monkeys. One of them was the king himself. They had made a chair of their hands and were careful not to hurt her. "Why do you have to obey the charm of the golden cap?" she asked. "That is a long story," answered the king with a laugh, "but as we have a long journey before us, I will pass the time by telling you about it if you wish." "Oh, I shall be glad to hear it," she said. "Once," began the leader, "we were a free people, living happily in the great forest, flying from tree to tree, eating nuts and fruits, and doing just as we pleased, without calling anybody master. Perhaps some of us were rather too full of mischief at times, flying down to pull the tails of animals that had no wings, chasing birds, throwing nuts at people who walked in the forest. But we were careless and happy and full of fun and enjoyed every minute of the day. This was many years ago, long before Oz came out of the clouds to rule the land. There lived here then, away at the north, a beautiful princess who was also a powerful sorceress. All her magic was used to help the people, and she was never known to hurt anyone who was good. Her name was Gaylette, and she lived in a handsome palace built from great blocks of ruby. Do you know what color rubies are? They're red. I'll show you some. My ring is, there's some rubies on my ring, and my other ring has a ruby too. They're red. Everyone loved her, but her greatest sorrow was that she could find no one to love in return, since all the men were much too stupid and ugly to mate with her. At last, however, she found a boy who was handsome and manly and wise beyond his years. Gaylette made up her mind that when he grew to be a man, she would make him her husband. So she took him to her ruby palace and used all her magic powers to make him as strong and good and lovely as any woman could wish. When he grew to manhood, Kaylala, as he was called, was said to be the best and wisest man in all the land, while his manly beauty was so great that Gaylette loved him dearly and hastened to make everything ready for the wedding. My grandfather was at that time the king of the winged monkeys that lived in the forest near Gaylette's palace, and the old fellow loved a joke better than a good dinner. One day, just before the wedding, my grandfather was flying with his band when he saw Kaylala walking beside the river. He was dressed in a rich costume of pink silk and purple velvet, and my grandfather thought he would see what he could do. At his word, the band flew down, seized Kaylala, carried him in their arms till they were over the middle of the river, and dropped him into the water. "Swim out, my fine fellow," cried my grandfather, "and see if the water has spotted your clothes." Kaylala was much too wise not to swim, and he was not in the least spoiled by all his good fortune. He laughed when he came to the top of the water and swam to the shore. But when Gaylette came running out to him, she found his silks and velvet all ruined by the river. The princess was very angry, and she knew, of course, who had done it. She had all the winged monkeys brought before her, and she said at first that their wings should be tied and they should be treated as they had treated Kaylala, and dropped into the river. But my grandfather pleaded hard, for he knew the monkeys would drown in the river with their wings tied, and Kaylala said a kind word for them also. So Gaylette finally spared them, on condition that the winged monkeys should ever after do 3 times the bidding of the owner of the golden cap. This cap had been made for a wedding present for Kaylala, and it is said to have cost the princess half her kingdom. Of course, my grandfather and all the other monkeys at once agreed to the condition, and that is how it happens that we are 3 times the slaves of the owner of the golden cap, whomsoever he may be. "And what became of them?" asked Dorothy, who had been greatly interested in the story. "Kaylala, being the first owner of the golden cap," said the monkey, "was the first to lay wishes upon us. As his bride could not bear the sight of us, he called us all to him in the forest after he had married her, and ordered us to always keep where she could never see us again, which we were glad to do, for we were all afraid of her. This was all we ever had to do until the golden cap fell into the hands of the Wicked Witch of the West, who made us enslave the Winkies and drive Oz himself out of the land of the West. Now that the golden cap is yours, and 3 times you will have the right to lay your wishes upon us." As the Monkey King finished his story, Dorothy looked down and saw the green, shining walls of the Emerald City before them. She wondered at the rapid flight of the monkeys, but was glad the journey was over. The strange creatures set the travelers down carefully before the gate of the city. The king bowed low to Dorothy, and then flew swiftly away, followed by all of his band. "Well, that was a good ride," said the little girl. "Yes, and a quick way out of our troubles," replied the lion. "How lucky it was that you brought away that wonderful cap." So, in that story, the monkeys carried them back to Oz. You might want to draw a picture of the golden cap, a picture of them being carried by the monkeys, or a picture of the princess who made them her captives. Here's chapter 15, The Discovery of Oz the Terrible. The 4 travelers walked up to the great gate of the Emerald City and rang the bell. After ringing several times, it was opened by the same guardian at the gate they had met before. "What? You back again?" he asked in surprise. "Well, do you not see us?" said the Scarecrow. "But I thought you'd gone to visit the Wicked Witch of the West." "We did visit her," said the Scarecrow. "And she let you go again?"
Well, she could not help it, for she's melted, explained the Scarecrow. Melted? Well, that's good news indeed, said the man. Who melted her? It was Dorothy, said the Lion gravely. Good gracious, exclaimed the man, and he bowed very low indeed before her. Then he led them into his little room and unlocked the spectacles from the great box on all their eyes, just as he had done before. And now can you guess what color everything will be? Afterward, they passed on through the gate into the Emerald City, and when the people heard from the guardian of the gate that they had melted the Wicked Witch of the West, they all gathered around the travelers and followed them in a great crowd to the Palace of Oz. The soldier with the green whiskers was still on guard before the door, but he let them in at once, and they were again met by the beautiful green girl who showed each of them to this old room at once. They might rest until Great Oz was ready to receive them. The soldier had the news carried straight to Oz that Dorothy and the other travelers had come back again after destroying the Wicked Witch, but Oz made no reply. They thought the Great Wizard would send for them at once, but he did not. They had no word for him the next day, nor the next, nor the next. The waiting was tiresome and wearing, and at last they grew so vexed that Oz should treat them in so poor a fashion after sending them to undergo such hardships and slavery. So, the Scarecrow at last asked the green girl to take another message to Oz, saying if he did not let them in to see him at once, they would call the winged monkeys to help them and find out whether he kept promises or not. When the wizard was given this message, he was so frightened that he sent word for them to come to the throne room at 4 minutes after 9 o'clock the next morning. He had once met the winged monkeys in the land of the West, and he did not wish to meet them again. The 4 travelers passed a sleepless night, each thinking of the gift Oz had promised to bestow upon him. Dorothy fell asleep only once, and then she dreamed she was in Kansas, where Aunt Em was telling her how glad she was to have her little girl home again. Promptly at 9 o'clock the next morning, the green-whiskered soldier came to them, and 4 minutes later, they all went to the throne room of the great Oz. Of course, each one of them expected to see the wizard in the shape that he had taken before, and all were greatly surprised when they looked about and saw no one at all in the room. They kept close to the door and closer to one another, for the stillness of the empty room was more dreadful than any of the forms they had seen Oz take. Presently they heard a voice seeming to come from somewhere near the top of the great throne room, and it said solemnly, "I am Oz, the great and terrible. Why do you seek me?" They looked again in every part of the room, and then seeing no one, Dorothy said, "Where are you?" "I am everywhere," answered the voice, "but to the eyes of common mortals I am invisible. I will now seat myself upon my throne that you may converse with me." Indeed, the voice seemed just then to come straight from the throne itself. So they walked toward it and stood in a row while Dorothy said, "We have come to claim our promise, O Oz." "What promise?" said Oz. "You promised to send me back to Kansas when the Wicked Witch was destroyed." "And you promised to give me brains," said the Scarecrow. "And you promised to give me a heart," said the Tin Woodman. "And you promised to give me courage," said the Cowardly Lion. "Is the Wicked Witch really destroyed?" asked the voice, and Dorothy thought it trembled a little. "Yes," she answered. "I melted her with a bucket of water." "Dear me," said the voice. "How sudden! Well, come to me tomorrow, for I must have time to think it over." "Oh, you've had plenty of time already," the Tin Woodman said angrily. "We shan't wait a day longer," said the Scarecrow. "You must keep your promises to us," exclaimed Dorothy. The Lion thought it might be just as well to frighten the wizard, so he gave a large, loud roar, which was so fierce and dreadful that Toto jumped away from him in alarm and tipped over the screen that stood in the corner. And as it fell with a crash, they looked that way, and in the next moment all of them were filled with wonder, for they saw, standing in just the spot the screen was hidden, standing in just the spot the screen had hidden, a little old man with a bald head and a wrinkled face, who seemed to be just as much surprised as they were. The Tin Woodman, raising his axe, rushed forward, and the little man had cried out, "Who are you?" "I am Oz, the great and terrible," said the little man in a trembling voice. "But don't strike me, please don't, and I'll do anything you want me to." Our friends looked at him in surprise and dismay. "I thought Oz was a great head," said Dorothy. "I thought Oz was a lovely lady," said the Scarecrow. "And I thought Oz was a terrible beast," said the Tin Woodman. And I thought Oz was a ball of fire, exclaimed the lion. No, you're all wrong, said the little man meekly. I have been making believe. Making believe, said Dorothy. Are you not a great wizard? Hush, my dear. Don't speak so loud, or you'll be overheard, and I should be ruined. I'm supposed to be a great wizard. And aren't you? She asked. Oh, not a bit of it, my dear. I'm just a common man. Well, you're more than that, said the Scarecrow in a grieved tone. You're a humbug. Exactly so, declared the little man, rubbing his hands together as if it pleased him. I am a humbug. But this is terrible, said the Tin Woodman. How shall I ever get my heart? Were I my courage, said the lion, or my brains, wailed the Scarecrow, wiping the tears from his eyes with his coat sleeve. My dear friend, said Oz, I pray you not to speak of these little things. Think of me and the terrible trouble I am in it being found out. Doesn't anybody else know you're a humbug? Said Dorothy. No one knows it but you four and myself, replied Oz. A humbug is like somebody who fools somebody. It's a bad guy. I have fooled everyone so long that I thought I should never be found out. It was a great mistake, my ever letting you into the throne room. Usually I won't even see my subjects, and so they believe I'm something terrible. But I don't understand, said Dorothy in bewilderment. How was it that you appeared to me as a great head? Well, that was one of my tricks, said Oz. Step this way and I will tell you about it. So he led the way into a small chamber in the rear of the throne room, and they all followed him. He pointed to one corner in which lay the great head, made out of many thicknesses of paper and with a carefully painted face. This I hang from the ceiling by a wire, said Oz. I stood behind the screen and pulled the thread to make the eyes move and the mouth open. But what about the voice? She inquired. Oh, I'm a ventriloquist, and that's somebody who can make their voice sound like it's coming from someone else. And I can throw the sound of my voice wherever I wish, so that you thought it was coming out of the head. There are some other things I used to deceive you. He showed the Scarecrow the dress and the mask that he had worn when he seemed to be a lovely lady. And the Tin Woodman saw that his terrible beast was nothing but a lot of skins sewn together with slats to keep their sides out. As for the ball of fire, the false wizard had hung that from the ceiling. It was really a ball of cotton, but when oil was poured on it, the ball burned fiercely. Really, said the Scarecrow, you ought to be ashamed of yourself for being such a humbug. Well, I certainly am, answered the little man sorrowfully, but it was the only thing I could do. Sit down, please. There are plenty of chairs, and I will tell you my story. So they sat down and listened while he told the following tale. I was born in Omaha. Why, Omaha? That isn't very far from Kansas, said Dorothy. No, but it's farther from here, he said, shaking his head at her sadly. When I grew up, I became a ventriloquist, and at that I was very well trained by a great master. I can imitate any kind of bird or beast, and here he mewed like a cat, so that Toto pricked up his ears and looked everywhere to see where a cat was. After a time, continued Oz, I tired of that, and I became a balloonist. What is that? Said Dorothy. A man who goes up in a balloon on circus day, so as to draw a crowd of people together and get them to pay to see the circus, he explained. Oh, she said, I know. Well, one day I went up in a balloon and the ropes got twisted, so I couldn't come down again. It went way up above the clouds, so far that a current of air struck it and carried it many miles away. For a day and a night I traveled through the air, and on the morning of the second day, I awoke and found the balloon floating over a strange and beautiful country. It came down gradually, and I was not hurt a bit. But I found myself in the midst of a strange people who, seeing me come out of the clouds, thought I was a great wizard. Of course, I let them think so because they were afraid of me and promised to do anything I wished them to do. So just to amuse myself and keep the good people busy, I ordered them to build this city and my palace, and they did it all willingly and well. And then I thought, as the country was so green and beautiful, I would call it the Emerald City. And to make the name fit better, I put green spectacles on all the people so that everything they saw would be green. But isn't everything here green? Asked Dorothy. No more than in any other city, said Oz. But when you wear green spectacles, why, of course, everything you see looks green. The Emerald City was built a great many years ago, for I was a young man when the balloon brought me here, and I'm a very old man now. But my people have worn green glasses on their eyes so long that most of them think it really is an Emerald City, and it certainly is a beautiful place.
abounding in jewels and precious metals and every good thing that's needed to make one happy. I've been good to the people, and they like me, but ever since this palace was built, I have shut myself up and will not see any of them. One of my greatest fears were the witches, for while I had no magical powers at all, I soon found out that they really were able to do wonderful things. There were 4 of them in this country, and they ruled the people who lived in the north, south, east, and west. Fortunately, the witches of the north and south were good, and I knew they would do me no harm. But the witches of the east and west were terribly wicked, and they had not thought I was more powerful than they themselves. The witches of the east and west were terribly wicked, and had they not thought I was more powerful than they were, they would surely have destroyed me. As it was, I lived in deadly fear of them for many years, so you can imagine how pleased I was when I heard your house had fallen on the wicked witch of the east, and when you came to me, I was willing to promise anything if you would do away with the other witch, but now that you've melted her, I'm ashamed to say I can't keep my promises. I think you are a very bad man, said Dorothy. No, no, my dear, I'm really a very good man. I'm not a very bad wizard, I must admit. Well, can't you give me brains? Said the Scarecrow. Oh, you don't need them. You're learning something every day. A baby has brains, but it doesn't know much. Experience is the only thing that brings knowledge. And the longer you are on Earth, the more experience you are sure to get. Well, that may all be true, said the Scarecrow, but I shall be very unhappy unless you give me brains. The false wizard looked at him carefully. Well, he said with a sigh, I'm not much of a magician, as I said, but if you will come to me tomorrow morning, I'll stuff your head with brains. I cannot tell you how to use them, however. You must find that out for yourself. Oh, thank you, said the Scarecrow. I will find a way to use them, never fear. But how about my courage? Asked the Lion anxiously. Oh, you have plenty of courage, I am sure, answered Oz. All you need is confidence in yourself. There is no living thing that is not afraid when it faces danger. True courage is in facing danger when you are afraid. And that kind of courage you have in plenty. Perhaps I have, but I'm scared just the same, said the Lion. I shall really be very unhappy unless you give me the sort of courage that makes one forget he is afraid. Oh, very well. I will give you that sort of courage tomorrow, replied Oz. How about my heart? Said the Tin Woodman. Why, as for that, answered Oz, I think you are wrong to want a heart. It makes most people unhappy. If you only knew it, you're in luck not to have a heart. Well, that must be a matter of opinion, said the Tin Woodman. For my part, I would bear all the unhappiness without a murmur if you would give me a heart. Well, very well, said Oz meekly. Come to me tomorrow, and you shall have a heart. I have played wizard for so many years that I may as well continue the part a little longer. And now, said Dorothy, how am I going to get back to Kansas? Well, we shall have to think about that, replied the little man. Give me 2 or 3 days to consider, and I will try to find you a way to carry... Give me 2 or 3 days to consider the matter, and I'll try to find a way to carry you over the desert. In the meantime, you shall all be treated as my guests, and while you live in the palace, my people will wait upon you and obey your slightest wish. There is only one thing I ask in return for my help, such as it is. You must keep my secret and tell no one that I'm a humbug. So they agreed to say nothing of what they had learned, and went back to their rooms in high spirits. Even Dorothy had the hope that the great and terrible humbug, as she called him now, would find a way to send her back to Kansas, and if he did that, she was willing to forgive him anything. So the great and terrible Oz turns out to be a little man who's been pretending all this time. If you were going to be a great wizard and you wanted to show yourself to other people and make them scared or frightened or excited to meet you, what shapes would you take? What kind of a shape would you be? Would you be Sonic the Hedgehog? Or would you be a Power Ranger? Or would you be Batman? Or would you be a lion or a monster? Maybe you could draw yourself as a big, powerful wizard. Okay, that's all my chapters in my jammies. And the next time we get together, I'll read you the end of the book. Bye, guys.